Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in this The Clown Decade. The decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better, and my god, are they getting worse for our neighbours over in Europe. Because today we are going through why exactly the Iberian Peninsula was wiped of all light, all electricity, bar the odd light that you can see along the coast, plus obviously the odd hospital generator that would help stop the sick from dying. It's a total disaster. France, totally fine, we'll get into why, obviously. It's also important news to mention that while Spain and Portugal lost all power and relatively small parts of South France, Gibraltar still had its power on. Because what can I say, despite us living in the Clown Decade, at least Britain can keep the lights on, unlike the Spanish. So, what caused all this? Well, just a week ago on the 22nd of April, Spain hit first weekday of 100% renewable power on the national grid. Spain's grid ran entirely 100% on renewable energy for the first time on April 16, with wind, solar and hydro meeting all peninsular electricity demand during a weekday. 5 days later, solar set a new record, generating 20,120 megawatts of instantaneous power, covering 78.6% of demand and 61.5% of the grid mix. And so there was much rejoicing. Net zero works is what an awful lot of people were claiming this meant. And wouldn't you know, it's just 5 days after this happened. Total blackout on the entire peninsula. Total blackout. And well, I think we should go over to The Guardian to find out why this was. So, what happened? Well, some initial reports suggest a rare atmospheric phenomenon may have been to blame, citing a statement attributed to the Portuguese grid operator Haryan. In extreme weather, such as storms and heat waves, the cables that carry electricity overhead can oscillate, which can cause problems with the conductors, particularly on older and less well-maintained equipment. However, the weather in Spain was normal on Monday. On Tuesday, Haryan denied it had been responsible for the statement, but did not give further details. Incredible. This was what I originally saw as well. It was the wires. Amazingly, Spain and Portugal, the most infamous part of Europe for having heat waves and tropical storms, apparently had a power grid that could not handle heat waves and tropical storms. Despite the fact they've had heat waves and tropical storms for centuries, not even decades, centuries. And when they made their grid, apparently they didn't account for it. And it's only just in 2025 where it's hit. Oh, but when this came out, no, Haryan had to say, no, we didn't say that, that's stupid. So it wasn't climate change, is what we can say. The Portuguese government blamed an unexplained power transmission issue. In Portugal, we have no information related to a cyber attack or a hostile act at this stage, said a government spokesperson, Antonio Letayo Amaro, who told CNN Portugal there seems to have been an issue in Spain's power transmission, and Spain pointed fingers at a break-up in its connection to France. Experts have said it could take days to identify the cause. So, early on in the stage of what happened, it's basically Portugal pointing at Spain and Spain pointing at France, which doesn't make any sense, because as we saw from the picture before, France's power was perfectly fine. So again, we're blaming connectors. That is because of a very specific reason. That is because these crazy countries are all going toward a net zero lunacy, and if they blame that, it's not going to be very good for anyone involved, because everyone's been pushing this sort of thing. You think it's bad in Britain, it's been happening all over Europe, and it's just made everything worse. To the point they just don't want to address the elephant in the room as soon as there's a power cut throughout an entire country. So the next thing was, did renewable energy play a part? So Spain and Portugal lead the EU in renewables and were sourcing about 80% of their electricity from solar and wind when the blackout hit on Monday. It's also worth pointing out at this point that obviously we're constantly told, oh, solar and wind, yeah, they're the cheapest types of energy. Cheapest types of energy. 80% of the grid in Spain and Portugal seems to run mostly on these two particular renewables. Well, you look at a heat map of the energy prices throughout Europe, and Spain's are on the more expensive end of the scale. France obviously put everything into nuclear and is on the cheaper side of Western Europe. What I'm trying to make clear here is that it seems fairly obvious to me that going down the renewable route does not seem to be a silver bullet for cheap energy prices, but on top of that, it appears to cause blackouts. Oh, you can't prove that. It shut down an entire country for 2 days. I think I can say that. Anyway, some commentators speculated that the grid could have been overloaded by the amount of wind and sun available, as renewables are more intermittent than other forms of energy, and sudden fluctuations in sunshine or wind can cause problems, but this does not appear to be the case. The nature of the scale of the outage makes it unlikely that the volume of renewable was the cause, with the Spanish network more often than not subject to very high volumes of such production. Makes sense given they're very sunny. The Spanish grid operator said on Tuesday that there had been 2 events akin to loss of power generation followed by a massive loss of renewable power, which destabilised the grid. And they said it was very possible the first of these events was a sudden loss of solar panel power. Oh. So when the question is it renewables' fault, and people say, oh, well, it was overloaded, The Guardian is trying to write it in such a way of, oh, no, it wasn't that they were overloaded, it was nothing to do with renewable energy. And then in the last paragraph they say, okay, it was because of renewable energy, but it was actually because they were underloaded more than overloaded. So, this is even The Guardian saying, renewables are a bit of a problem. Anyway, The Guardian is shockingly honest about renewables at this point. Are renewable-based grids more fallible? Blackouts can happen regardless of what type of energy powers the grid. In 2003, there was a significant blackout in London when the grid was primarily powered by fossil fuels. It was caused by a failed transformer and an incorrectly installed protection relay. I say they're honest, they still get excuses out early, don't they? Oh, this can happen with fossil fuels as well. Yeah, people know that. There are people that lived through the 70s. The 2019 UK blackout was caused by equipment failure at a wind farm and at a gas power station, both of which occurred when a lightning strike hit a transmission circuit north of London. In both cases, engineering failures caused the problem, not necessarily wind farms or gas power stations. That's understandable. However, again, this is not an entire country's power grid going down when it's reliant on renewable power, is it? These are quite different, Guardian. In 2003, a problem with a hydroelectric power line between Italy and Switzerland caused a major outage across the Italian peninsula for about 12 hours. Again, that's renewable, though. And yeah, I don't think anyone's saying that this is unique necessarily to renewables. However, I don't think we've seen an entire country lose power for some time. Again, you're having to get examples back from 2003. It was over 20 years ago. This was before net zero was even remotely orthodox. Keith Ball, Professor of Electrical Engineering at the University of Strathclyde, said, events of this scale have happened in many places around the world over the years. The power systems using fossil fuels, nuclear, hydro or variable renewables, it doesn't matter where you are getting the energy from, you've got to get the engineering right. Yes, I understand that. So the Spanish grid is undergoing upgrades as it is unable to carry the renewable energy required. Experts have said the grid upgrades have not matched the pace of newer renewables being brought online. So again, now the argument is, oh, renewables are actually too good. Prathishka Ramdas, a senior analyst at Rystad Energy, said, we cannot say that high wind and solar power caused the blackout. In the days before, we saw far greater amounts of renewables in the system, but greater amounts of renewables may have made it more difficult to absorb a frequency disturbance. And so this is all to do with something in the energy business known as inertia. So inertia in the power grid is to do with turbines, or the lack of turbines in some cases. The way traditionally we made power was by having glorified kettles using steam, water, whatever. You heat up the water, it makes steam, it turns these turbines very quickly. And that's what's been generating our power for decades. And these have high inertia. Because these turbines are spinning and generating power, should a energy plant be switched off for whatever reason, these turbines will still have inertia and still keep spinning. Think about when you're driving a car and you take your foot off the accelerator and push the clutch down and you're coasting. Inertia is effectively coasting for turbines. And because of this, there's less power fluctuation. Instead of having power going at 100% and then going straight down to, say, 0%, like you would if you had solar and then massive cloud cover came over, say, it slows down gradually, effectively giving engineers time to react to get emergency power in, so you don't get these fluctuations that cause blackouts, as we see, due to power line issues or transformer issues where the electricity goes doolally. Renewables don't have this inbuilt like we've had traditionally. Obviously, with wind power, they just stop. They're quite resistant because of the way that they create power. If the wind just drops for whatever reason, your power just stops in turbines. It doesn't take very long either. Solar's way worse for this. There's no turbine whatsoever. That's just reliant on photons. If for whatever reason photons stop getting through, your power just goes. And so there needs to be a way around this, which obviously has not been put in place in Spain and Portugal, which caused this issue. There are actually quite simple ways around it. There are two main ones. The big one obviously being battery backup systems that will take place to make up for this lack of inertia. Or there's also this other crazy idea where effectively you use part of the power generated by wind turbines and solar panels to effectively keep a random turbine spinning. It doesn't generate anything, it literally just spins. And then when power starts to shut down, within wind turbines and solar panels, this already spinning turbine will work as an inertia turbine, so that obviously engineers have time to react to keep the power grid in place. It's cool ideas and good engineering, but at the end of the day, this is all still more expensive than they are letting on. A battery backup system is incredibly expensive, and these turbines are probably the cheaper option, but how reliable they are, I would imagine they're not as reliable as the battery system. Ultimately, I'm telling you this because the arguments against net zero being unreliable, is that they actually do have solutions they are working on for this unreliableness. The issue I've had for a long time is that it's unreliable but not completely useless. It's useful to have wind and solar panels in line with, at the moment obviously, fossil fuels. I want to get fracking, for example, and the whole idea is that we move to nuclear with the odd renewable put in place where we see fit. Wind turbines are actually quite popular, as it turns out. I've come round to thinking they're not a completely horrific sight. I wouldn't put them in outstanding areas of natural beauty, but, you know, you can have them next to motorways, I guess. With solar power, I probably wouldn't have them on farmers' fields, or at least subsidised to do so. If the farmer thinks that it's worth having the solar panels on a field, so be it, but I wouldn't subsidise it. This would be my ideal world. We don't have it in Spain. Went a completely different direction, where it was pointed out that the percentage of solar power was extremely high before the failure, and apparently solar had displaced almost all high inertia sources. High inertia meaning they've got the spinning turbines. The low inertia and fast-acting solar could have led to the instability and collapse of the grid without the right weather conditions. Broken clouds and wind could have introduced some hard-to-control power surges, hence we need these batteries and these flywheels, which obviously Spain did not prepare for. What I'm saying is that this was actually quite avoidable, and it's why if you are going to do renewables, you have to do it right and you have to do it slowly. This rush to get it all done by 2050 or whenever, probably way too soon, and we're seeing the results of doing these things too quickly as it is. Plus it's making energy more expensive, despite the fact it is actually quite cheap when it works. But it's pretty obvious why everything's getting more expensive in Spain, because they're getting rid of their reliable power sources. 3 years ago, people were cheering the event of nuclear power stations being demolished, with renewable energy companies celebrating, saying today has seen a historic moment in the world of energy, a symbol of the decarbonisation process in which we are immersed. A new era is opening in which renewable energy will be the protagonist. And as you can see, nuclear power, which is famous for putting out thousands of carbon emissions, that's sarcasm by the way, is being demolished, because at the end of the day these aren't people who want solutions, they are people who want to cause more problems, because at the end of the day, as I say, they're basically communists. And in fact, at least according to this source, the Green Party was celebrating the destruction of Spain's nuclear power plants by soyjacking in front of it. And what happens in the end? 2 days of full-on blackouts. The last time we had consistent power failures over in Britain, we got Margaret Thatcher for 10 years. I wonder if something similar will happen over in Spain if this carries on. Anyway, to really nail this point home, this is a renewables issue. However, it is an issue that there are likely engineering workarounds for, as SFEN experts noted that the wave of frequency variations from Spain actually ended up on European networks, so the renewable ended up nearly causing a blackout in the rest of Europe. However, the French network, which is what they hit first, where the inertia of nuclear rotating groups attenuated this phenomenon, avoided a domino effect. In other words, because France focused on nuclear, which Spain decided to get rid of, they managed to avoid a blackout. If that doesn't show nuclear supremacy, I don't know what does. Anyway, to bring this back round to Britain, it was pointed out by Andrew Montford, pointed out that obviously the Spanish blackouts are in the news and everyone's talking about inertia because that was where the main issue was. He points out that a large chunk of the UK's inertia comes from the Drax wood burner, and so our grid stability is largely dependent on wood chips being shipped from halfway around the world, which is obviously, this comes under the biomass type of energy, which technically counts as renewable energy because you burn biomass and you grow it again. That's the whole point. You grow a whole load of trees, you chip them up, you burn the wood chips, you replant the trees, you grow them up, and that's what makes it renewable. And as I point out, the French just use nuclear. So just use nuclear. I mean, to be fair, we are building some nuclear power stations, but nobody's ever going to forget the Nick Clegg quote of, oh, nuclear power plants won't be operational till 2020, so what's the point? Which is what he said in 2010 or something like that. So yeah, thanks for that. Instead of having nuclear power plants nearly operational at this point, instead we have to rely on importing wood. Great. Again, net zero probably wouldn't be so much of a disaster if they just focused on nuclear with supplementary power coming from some wind and solar. But that's not what they did. An awful lot of people are getting rid of nuclear because, as I say, they're communists who don't like the idea of people having a whole bunch of power, as in energy. Why is that? I don't know. I think they just hate people having fun, and an easy way to have fun is have lots of energy. Anyway, MPs are now reacting to all this, with the UK constantly looking at their own reliance to prepare for possible blackouts, a cabinet minister has said in the wake of a large power outage which affected Spain and Portugal. Environmental Secretary Steve Reed added that the UK must wait and see what caused the blackouts before learning lessons to help strengthen the UK's energy network. Widespread power cuts put Spain and Portugal on a standstill on Monday as traffic lights switched off and people were left unable to access cash machines. Oh, that's another good point, actually, yeah. A lot of people tried to get to cash machines because card machines weren't working and they weren't working either, and so their money was stuck, unfortunately. I'm not one to bother too much usually about cashless societies, but there clearly is a problem with cashless societies if we don't have power, which is why it's incompatible with net zero. Ed Miliband, though, had different ideas, saying that it was too early to jump to conclusions about what happened, and said that he had been in touch with the UK's National Energy System operator after the outage in Spain and Portugal. Meanwhile, Home Secretary Yvette Cooper told Sky News that the UK had a continued approach to resilience and security issues, saying, "We've been looking, as part of a wider security review across the country, how we deal with both resilience and also different kinds of challenges and threats." In other words, this could have been us, and still actually might be us, but luckily it happened in Spain first, and now the net zero zealots are saying, okay, we actually need to take this whole they're unreliable thing seriously. Which is just true. As much as Ed Miliband's trying to downplay the whole thing, I wouldn't be shocked if he's trying to panic. Then again, Ed Miliband's the type of person to say this.
You're saying that tax rates don't impact pricing?
I'm saying that in relation to oil and gas, they don't, because the truth is that the price for our oil and gas is set internationally. And let me explain. Let me just... If you just let me make the point.
I went through this the other day. I really don't need to go through it again. Ed Miliband is an idiot, so maybe he's not panicking and maybe he actually believes the whole thing's fine. Anyway, the most interesting part of all this, I'd say, is Tony Blair weighing in on the whole thing, who has said, or warned in fact, there needs to be a radical reset of irrational net zero policies because they are doomed to fail. The former PM said voters were being asked to make financial sacrifices and change in lifestyle that would have minimal effect on global emissions. Well, that's what I've been saying for 8 years. Blair said that attempts to phase out fossil fuels in the short term were doomed to fail, arguing the inconvenient facts were that the production and demand for them was rising. He argued that backlash against climate change policies threatened to derail the whole agenda, in the latest sign that mainstream consensus on green policies is collapsing. Blair's intervention, days before the local elections, was met with anger in government as it could bolster opposition parties, as both Reform and Conservatives have criticised the government's net zero policies. Sure, Reform have said we'll get rid of it completely, and we'll get into Nigel Farage's history on that. Kemi's whole idea is, 2050 might not be the right year, however it could be 2051. So I'm not really taking the Conservatives thinks it's stupid approach seriously here. There are also concerns Labour will lose votes to the Greens, because obviously Tony Blair has said this, but they were losing votes to the Greens anyway, so I don't think it's made that much difference. But yeah, I just want to address the fact that there seems to be factions of the right that thinks Tony Blair's actually secretly based and was based all along. No, the reality of Tony Blair is that he will lie to you and is just reactive on issues like this. He's not said this before, he's only saying it now because effectively the push for net zero has been a disaster. And so at the end of the day, he understands how to win votes, and how you win votes is by not making people's lives worse, by, say, making energy prices higher. But there we go. But as mentioned before, this is just Tony Blair taking up the Nigel Farage position, who says that he hopes to become the voice of opposition, obviously, and has actually campaigned for a referendum on the UK's 2050 net zero emissions target. I can't be bothered with a referendum, just say you'll get rid of the target. When he was leader of UKIP, the party's 2015 and 2017 election manifestos pledged to rip up green measures, repeal the UK's Climate Change Act, withdraw from the 2015 Paris Agreement, and supports fossil fuel extraction. And I'm told this man isn't based. I'm told this man just follows the wave of all these things. No, he's ahead. Typically, he's ahead of this whole thing. These reflected Farage's personal views on climate action. In 2015, he told the Libertarian website Spiked, "I think wind energy is the biggest collective economic insanity I've seen in my entire life. Never seen anything more stupid, illogical, or irrational." Which, yeah, that's true. We've had to subsidise it for years. And then as it goes on, it says in 2021, Farage said that he was very much an environmentalist and that he couldn't abide things like plastics in our sea or pollution in our rivers. But on the issue of climate change, he said, "What annoys me is the complete obsession with CO2, almost to the exclusion of everything else, the alarmism that comes with it based on dodgy predictions and science," which, as I've been through for 8 years, yeah, pretty much. And it's worth noting as well that part of the reason Nigel Farage got debanked was because of his stance on net zero. There was a section in the dossier on his net zero stance. Funniest part of that being was that their only source for that was a Guardian opinion piece that didn't even source a primary source of Farage being against net zero. He is, but the point is that the dossier didn't cite any primary source on that, which I just found hilarious. Anyway, Farage vindicated and based. Vote for him tomorrow if you're in England. At this point, though, I've made my point, so I may as well let you know we're going to go through this ridiculous article on Saturday. Farage thinks net zero is the new Brexit. Starmer can prove him wrong. Yeah, this was written a few days before Spain went into a full blackout due to renewables, so yeah, it's going to be a good episode Saturday. Come along to it. Anyway, other shilling this week. On Thursday, I'll be doing a gaming stream, starting off a series on Subnautica because someone super chatted me, 3 years ago now, asking me to play it, so I better get round to it. So there you go. That's my new promise to you. I will do gaming streams on Thursday, and people have started sending in super chats asking me to play games, so I will start a new series dedicated to that. It's the least I can do for the amounts of money that you're sending me. Right, anyway, videos out as and when I can make them. If you want to help out the channel, do subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment. You can also become a channel member, or if you really want to, you can send a super chat and super thanks. Those are great and direct ways to help the channel. I very much appreciate them. But with that, that's everything I had for you for today. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.